The blizzard was the worst the region had seen in years. Snow whipped across the empty highway like 1,000 needles, and visibility dropped to just a few feet. Captain Daniel Reed was no stranger to danger, war zones, rescue missions, life and death decisions. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. His military truck skidded to a halt when his dog, Shadow, suddenly began barking uncontrollably. Daniel squinted through the storm and froze. A woman stood there, soaked in snow, trembling from the cold, cradling a newborn baby in her arms. Four small children clung to her legs, their faces raw from the freezing wind, their eyes wide with fear. They were alone. No car, no shelter, no help. Minutes away from freezing to death. Daniel stepped out, his boots sinking into the snow as Shadow growled softly beside him. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked. She didn't answer. She only stared at him with a desperation that cut deeper than the storm itself. In that instant, Daniel knew something was terribly wrong. He wrapped his coat around her shaking shoulders and said the only words that mattered, "Come with me, now." But the widow hesitated, as if she were hiding something. The dog growled. The children clung tighter, and Daniel realized. This family wasn't just cold. They were running from something. What happened next shocked everyone. Stay with us. This incredible story will leave you stunned. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The wind howled across the empty mountain road as if warning anyone foolish enough to be outside. Snowflakes slammed against the windshield of Captain Daniel Reed's truck, blurring everything ahead. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, leaning forward to see even a few feet beyond the glass. It was supposed to be a simple drive home after months of military duty. Just a quiet night through the forest road he'd taken dozens of times before. But tonight, the storm had turned familiar ground into something dangerous and unknown. The blizzard wasn't normal. It was brutal, sudden, and far stronger than the weather reports had predicted. Even Daniel, trained for harsh conditions, felt a small knot of unease tighten in his chest. His truck tires crunched over thick snow, slipping now and then, reminding him that one wrong move could trap him out here alone. Shadow, his German shepherd and loyal service dog, sat quietly in the passenger seat, alert, ears raised, eyes tracking every movement outside. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Almost home, buddy," he murmured, though the words sounded hollow even to him. The world outside had turned white. Sky, trees, road, all swallowed by the storm. For a moment, Daniel wondered if he should pull over and wait it out, but something inside pushed him forward. Maybe it was the need to reach home. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was something he couldn't explain yet. A sudden gust slammed the truck from the side, shaking it violently. Daniel steadied it, jaw clenched. The storm was getting worse, much worse. But then in the middle of the chaos, something strange happened. Shadow lifted his head sharply, sniffed the cold air leaking in through the vents, and let out a low, uneasy growl. Daniel frowned. Shadow never growled unless something was wrong. Daniel slowed the truck, eyes scanning the swirling snow in front of him. Something, or someone, was out there. And the storm, it seemed, was hiding more than just wind and ice. Shadow had never acted like this before. His body stiffened, ears pointed forward, and his nose twitched rapidly as he sniffed the cold air again and again. A deep, uneasy growl pushed up from his chest. Low, warning, almost trembling. Daniel glanced at him, surprised. This wasn't the growl Shadow used for danger during missions. This was different. It was urgent, personal. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered, turning the truck heater lower so he could hear better. Shadow suddenly stood on all fours, pressing his front paws against the dashboard, staring intensely through the frosted windshield. His breath fogged the glass, tail stiff, the muscles in his back tight. Daniel slowed the truck even more, heart beating a little faster. Outside, the snow fell harder, swirling in wild circles that made the world look like a moving white tunnel. Shadow barked, just once, sharp and commanding. Daniel's pulse jumped. Shadow didn't bark without reason. Daniel pulled the truck to the side, tires crunching to a stop on the icy road. The moment the engine quieted, Daniel heard it. Faint, nearly drowned by the storm but unmistakable. A sound, a cry, not loud, not clear, but real. Shadow barked again, more urgent this time, as if pleading for Daniel to listen. Daniel grabbed his coat, pushed the door open, and immediately felt the blizzard slap him across the face like a wall of ice needles. The cold stole his breath. He shielded his eyes and stepped out slowly, boots sinking into deep snow. Shadow leaped out behind him, landing silently despite his size. He lowered his head and began moving forward, nose close to the ground, following a scent only he could understand. Daniel trudged behind him, trusting him completely. He always had, on missions, on searches, on rescues. Shadow's instincts had saved lives before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, Shadow's urgency carried a strange fear, almost desperation. "Shadow, take it slow," Daniel called out, but his voice barely carried in the roaring wind. Shadow didn't slow. He pushed forward, deeper into the storm, weaving through the drifting snow as if he knew exactly where to go. Daniel followed, each step heavier than the last. His eyelashes froze. His breath turned to frost instantly. Then suddenly, Shadow stopped. Completely. He stared forward, unmoving, ears raised high, tail straight, body locked in full alert. Daniel's eyes narrowed, trying to see what Shadow saw. And then, through the blizzard's thick curtain, he noticed shapes. Small shapes, huddled together, barely standing. Daniel's stomach dropped. Shadow whimpered softly. There was no doubt now. Someone out there needed saving. Daniel's boots pushed through the snow as he followed Shadow's frozen tracks. The wind was unforgiving, whipping against his face, but he kept moving. Shadow stood only a few feet ahead, completely still, staring into the white haze like he had found something or someone. Daniel squinted, trying to focus his eyes through the swirling storm. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, but then the shapes became clearer, closer, real. 4 small children huddled tightly together, shivering violently. Their clothes were thin, soaked from the snow, and their little faces were pale and frightened. Snowflakes clung to their eyelashes like tiny crystals. Behind them, a woman, barely standing, held a newborn wrapped in a blanket that was no longer warm. Her hair was damp, sticking to her forehead, and her lips were turning blue from the cold. Daniel froze in place. A widow, alone, in the middle of a deadly blizzard, with 5 children. "How long have they been out here?" he whispered, his heart tightening. Shadow stepped forward shyly, sniffing the air around the children, then moved to the woman's feet. He whimpered, nudging her leg gently, trying to keep her awake. The woman lifted her eyes with effort. They were filled with fear, exhaustion, and something deeper, hopelessness. "Please." Her voice trembled, barely audible. "My kids. They're freezing." Daniel rushed forward instantly, adrenaline hitting him like a shockwave. He removed his own coat and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. The newborn inside her arms let out a weak cry, a sound so faint that it barely reached Daniel's ears. "Ma'am, I'm here to help," Daniel said firmly, lowering his voice so he wouldn't scare the children. "I'm Captain Daniel Reed, U.S. Army. You all need warmth right now. We need to get you to the truck." The children looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Their tiny bodies trembled uncontrollably. One of the girls tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too hard. Another child wiped tears from her cheeks, the tears freezing almost instantly. We tried walking," the mother whispered, her legs shaking under her own weight. "But the storm, we couldn't see anything." Shadow nudged one of the children gently, brushing his warm fur against their frozen hands. The smallest child leaned into the dog instinctively, desperate for warmth. Daniel saw this and felt a surge of urgency rise inside him. They didn't have minutes, they had seconds. He knelt beside the kids. "Listen," he said softly but quickly. "I'm taking you to safety. You just have to trust me, okay?" All 4 children nodded slowly, too weak to speak. Daniel turned back to the mother. "Can you walk?" She hesitated, then shook her head, tears forming in her frozen eyes. I don't know." Daniel's jaw clenched as the reality hit him. If he didn't act fast, the storm would take them all, and he refused to let that happen. Daniel gently supported the woman as she tried to steady herself. Her legs wobbled, almost giving out beneath her. The newborn whimpered weakly in her arms, and the children clung to her coat as if holding her upright. Daniel could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that didn't just come from the cold, but from life itself. "Ma'am, what's your name?" he asked softly, lowering himself so she didn't feel overwhelmed. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "Elena. Elena Parker." Daniel nodded. "Elena, you and your kids need warmth. We have to move now. But before we do, how long have you been out here?" Elena closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the strength to speak. "Hours, maybe more. The storm started earlier than expected. We were driving to the nearest town, but our truck, it just stopped. Engine died. And then the cold came so fast." Daniel felt a surge of anger at the storm, at the situation, at the thought of these children standing in freezing winds for hours. He steadied Elena as her knees bent slightly. She looked like she might collapse again. "Why didn't you walk sooner?" he asked gently. "Not to judge, just to understand." Elena's voice cracked. "I tried, but the snow got deeper with every minute. The babies started crying, and the older ones, they couldn't breathe properly in the cold. I didn't know which way to go anymore. Everything turned white." Beside them, Shadow nudged one of the little girls who had started shivering violently. Daniel immediately removed his scarf and wrapped it around her neck. She clutched it tightly, eyes wide with silent gratitude. Daniel turned back to Elena. "Where were you heading?" "Where's home?" Elena let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. We don't really have a home right now." Daniel's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Elena looked down at her newborn, brushing a shaky hand over the baby's cheek. "My husband, Michael, he died 6 months ago." Her voice wavered. "He served too, Marine Corps. A training accident took him. Since then, everything fell apart." Daniel swallowed hard. He knew what loss looked like. He knew what it did to a family. With a trembling exhale, Elena continued. "We couldn't afford the rent. I sold everything we had, trying to keep the kids fed. We were traveling to my sister's house. She promised she'd help us get back on our feet." Daniel listened quietly, heart sinking deeper with every word. "But halfway there," Elena whispered, "the truck stopped. No signal. No help. And she choked back a sob. "I didn't know what else to do except pray someone would come." Daniel felt the weight of her fear settle heavily onto his shoulders. The children pressed closer to their mother as if sensing her breaking voice. Shadow barked softly, almost as if reassuring her. Daniel placed a steady hand on her arm. "Elena, you're not alone anymore. I found you, and I'm not leaving you out here. Not in this storm." Her tired eyes met his. Hope flickered there, small, fragile, but alive. "Can you walk if I support you?" Daniel asked. With a shaky breath, she nodded. "I'll try." Daniel motioned toward his truck. "Good, because we're getting all of you to safety." The wind roared again, but this time, something felt different. They had a chance now, a real chance. Daniel tightened his hold around Elena as another violent gust of wind pushed against them. The storm was getting worse with every passing second, and he knew they didn't have the luxury of slow decisions. The children stood close together, trembling, their little faces red from the cold. Shadow circled around them protectively, guiding them toward Daniel's truck, as if herding them away from danger. "Elena, listen to me," Daniel said, raising his voice over the howling wind. "You and the kids cannot stay out here. If we don't move now, the cold will take over. We need to reach the truck. It's warm and safe." Elena's eyes darted toward the stormy darkness behind them, then to her children. She hesitated, fear, exhaustion, and confusion battling inside her. I don't want to slow you down," she whispered. "You've already done so much." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Saving lives doesn't slow me down. It's my job. And right now, you and your kids are my mission." The words struck her deeply. She blinked away tears, nodding weakly. He turned to the children, lowering himself to their level. "All right, little warriors," he said gently. "We're going on a short walk to my truck. I need you to hold hands and follow me and Shadow. Can you do that? 4 small heads nodded, though their bodies shook. Shadow barked once, loud enough to cut through the wind, and the children clung to each other, ready to follow him. Daniel helped Elena take the first step. Her legs nearly buckled, but he caught her quickly. Lean on me, he said. Don't worry about falling. She took a deep breath and nodded again. Each step was slow, heavy, and painful. But forward was the only direction left. Halfway to the truck, one of the boys stumbled in the snow. Shadow instantly moved beside him, nudging him upright. The boy touched Shadow's fur with frozen fingers, whispering a soft, "Thank you," that almost broke Daniel's heart. They reached the truck after what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes. Daniel yanked the door open, warm air rushing out into the freezing night. "Everyone, get in," he said urgently. "Now!" But as the children climbed inside one by one, Daniel noticed something. The fear in Elena's eyes wasn't fading. If anything, it was growing. She looked back at the storm once more, as if afraid of something hidden within it, something she hadn't told him yet. And Daniel realized, this blizzard wasn't the only danger out here tonight. The moment the children climbed into the truck, a wave of heat and relief washed over their frozen bodies. Their tiny hands pressed against the warm vents as if afraid the warmth might disappear. Shadow hopped in behind them, shaking the snow from his fur before settling himself between the kids like a protective guardian. The oldest girl, maybe 9 years old, stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Shadow tilted his head and gently nudged her hand with his nose. She flinched at first. The cold had numbed her fingers, but a moment later she reached out and touched his soft fur. For the first time since Daniel found them, the girl smiled. A small, fragile smile, but real. Shadow slowly lay down, stretching his body so the children could lean against him. His warmth was instant comfort, his heartbeat steady, calming. One of the boys curled beside him, resting his head on Shadow's chest as if he had known him forever. Shadow didn't move, didn't shift. He simply allowed them to cling to him, understanding the fear they carried. Daniel watched in the rearview mirror, his chest tightening. On missions, Shadow was fearless, trained, disciplined, laser-focused. But he had another gift too, one that no training could teach. He knew when someone needed comfort, especially children. Elena climbed into the passenger seat slowly, still shivering, cradling her newborn tightly. Daniel turned the heater toward her, adjusting it to full heat. The baby let out a soft cry, and instantly Shadow lifted his head, ears perking toward the infant. He didn't move. He simply listened, eyes gentle. "He likes the baby," Daniel said softly. Elena managed a weak nod. "Shadow. He feels safe," she whispered, watching as her children huddled closer around the dog. They haven't had that in a long time. Daniel didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. The kids' tiny voices, their sighs of relief, and the soft rhythm of Shadow's breathing filled the truck with a warmth that the heater couldn't provide alone. For the first time since the storm swallowed them, the children weren't crying. They weren't shaking. They weren't afraid. Shadow had given them something the blizzard had stolen: hope. But just as the moment softened, the storm outside roared louder, slamming against the truck with brutal force. And Daniel knew the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. Daniel shifted the truck into drive, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the engine rumbled beneath them. The heater blew warm air across the frozen faces of the children, but outside, the storm only grew more violent. Snow pounded the windshield like thousands of tiny fists, and the wipers struggled to push it aside fast enough for Daniel to see even a glimpse of the road. "Hold on, everyone," he said, keeping his voice steady. Shadow sat tall between the children, ears alert, eyes scanning every movement outside through the glass. The storm's roar sounded like a freight train rushing past them, but Shadow didn't flinch. He watched, ready for whatever came next. Daniel eased the truck forward, headlights cutting through the wall of white. The road beneath them had disappeared under several inches of fresh snow. Only memory and instinct guided him now. Elena turned her head slightly, her voice weak. Is it safe to drive in this?" Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. "Safe? No. But staying out here is worse. We just need to make it to the ranger station. It's a few miles ahead." She nodded, holding her newborn closer. The children huddled around Shadow, whispering softly as if talking too loudly might break the fragile safety of the truck's warm interior. Then, a violent gust slammed into the side of the truck. The entire vehicle jerked left. Elena gasped. One of the boys screamed softly. Daniel steadied the wheel, jaw tightening. "It's okay, I've got it." But the storm wasn't finished. The snow grew even heavier, swirling so thick that visibility dropped to almost nothing. Daniel leaned forward, eyes narrowed, searching for the slightest shape of the road. His knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel. "Come on, just a little further," he murmured. Another blast of wind hit them, harder this time. The truck skidded, just for a second, but enough to send Daniel's heart racing. The back wheels slid sideways across the icy surface, throwing the truck toward the edge of the road. Elena grabbed the dashboard, her breath catching in her throat. The children clutched Shadow, who braced himself, planting his paws firmly on the seat. Daniel reacted instantly. He turned the wheel sharply, correcting the slide, but the tires struggled for grip, spinning, fighting, clawing at the snow beneath them. Then, they caught. The truck straightened. Everyone exhaled at once, some with tears in their eyes. "Captain?" Elena whispered. Daniel didn't look away from the road. "We're okay, I promise. I won't let anything happen to you." But his voice betrayed something he couldn't hide. Worry. Because the truth was, this road was becoming a trap. The blizzard was erasing every landmark. The world looked the same in every direction, and the temperature was dropping faster than he expected. If the truck got stuck out here, Daniel pushed the thought away instantly. He glanced at Shadow through the mirror. Shadow stared back at him, eyes steady, tail still. They had worked through impossible missions before. They had survived moments worse than this. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was nature. Wild, merciless, unpredictable. A sudden cracking sound echoed beneath them. Daniel's heart lurched. The truck dipped, just slightly, before leveling again. "Elena," he said firmly, "make sure the kids are buckled. We might hit rough patches." She obeyed quickly, her hands trembling as she secured each child. Daniel inhaled deeply. No road markers, no visibility, no backup. Just a storm growing stronger by the minute, and 5 lives depending on him. He pressed the gas gently, whispering under his breath, "Please, just let us get through this." The storm raged outside like a living monster, but inside the truck, a different kind of fear began rising. Quiet, hidden, and far more alarming. Daniel kept his eyes locked on the road, but something felt wrong. The children, who had been whispering softly moments ago, were now silent. Too silent. He glanced quickly at the mirror and saw them staring at their mother with wide, frightened eyes. "Elena?" Daniel said, turning just enough to check on her. She didn't respond. Her head had tilted slightly toward the window, breath shaky, eyes half open as if she were fighting consciousness. The newborn whimpered weakly in her arms, but Elena didn't react. "Elena!" Daniel called again, louder this time. She blinked slowly, trying to focus. I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice barely rose above the hum of the heater. But she wasn't fine, not even close. Daniel pulled the truck to the side of the road again, ignoring the storm hammering against them. He reached over, gently but urgently steadying her, before she could slump forward. "You're freezing," he said. "You're shaking all over." Elena tried to protest, lifting her hand, but it dropped halfway, too weak to complete the motion. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her lips had a bluish tint. "I'm just tired," she murmured. Shadow moved closer, pushing his head between the seats, whining anxiously. He sniffed Elena's arm, then her face, then let out a sharp bark, his warning bark. The children panicked. "Mommy!" the smallest girl cried, grabbing her mother's sleeve. Daniel quickly unbuckled Elena's seatbelt and checked her pulse. It was fast, too fast, and her hands were ice cold. "Elena, look at me," he said firmly. "Did you eat today? Did you drink anything?" She swallowed with difficulty. I tried to save everything for them," she whispered, nodding toward the children. "They needed it more." Daniel's heart twisted painfully. This woman had exhausted her body just trying to keep her kids alive. "We need to get you to shelter immediately," he said. "You're going into hypothermia." Elena closed her eyes, her voice breaking. "Please, don't let anything happen to them." Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Nothing will happen to them, I promise." But inside, fear gnawed at him. Hypothermia wasn't something he could fight with bravery. He needed warmth, shelter, supplies, things he didn't have out here. The baby suddenly let out a sharp cry. Elena startled, clutching the infant closer. But her arms trembled so badly Daniel feared she might drop the child. "It's okay," he whispered, gently supporting her elbow. "I've got you." The truck rocked violently as another gust slammed into it. Snow piled higher around the tires and the temperature continued to fall. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't drive in this. They were running out of options. Shadow barked again, staring at Daniel intensely, as if urging him toward a decision. Daniel exhaled shakily. "We're finding shelter," he said. "Now." Because if he didn't move fast, they would lose Elena, and the children would lose the only parent they had left. As Daniel gripped the wheel again and pushed the truck forward, his chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. Elena's fading voice, the children's frightened eyes, the newborn's weak cry, it all pressed on him like a weight he couldn't shake. Shadow sensed it too. He glanced at Daniel, ears lowered, the same way he used to look at him on missions, when memories tried to break through. And this time they did. The icy road faded for a moment, replaced by another cold night, years earlier, on a military rescue mission overseas. Daniel could almost hear the distant explosions again, the shouts of his squad, the frantic radio calls. They had been ordered to evacuate a small village after a sudden attack. Women, children, elders, everyone rushed toward the armored trucks. But one family hadn't made it in time. A mother and two young kids were trapped in a collapsing building. Daniel and Shadow had run inside, pushing through smoke and falling debris. He reached the children, pulling them out safely. But when he returned for the mother, the roof gave way. A wall of fire blocked the hallway, forcing him back. Shadow barked wildly beside him, but there was nothing they could do. The team pulled him out as the structure crumbled completely. Daniel never forgot the sound, the roar of the collapse, the cries he couldn't silence, the guilt he carried home. And now, staring at Elena's pale face, watching her fight consciousness, the same fear clawed at his gut. Not again. Not another mother. Not more children losing their entire world. Shadow let out a soft whine, breaking Daniel's thoughts. Daniel blinked hard. Pulling himself back into the present, the road reappeared, the storm, the snow, the cold, and the 5 lives depending on him. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The children were still pressed close to Shadow, clinging to him as if he were the only thing keeping them grounded. Elena's head rested weakly against the seat, her breathing uneven. Daniel felt something shift inside him. "This time," he whispered under his breath, "I'm getting everyone home." The storm slammed against the truck once more, shaking the frame, but Daniel didn't flinch. His mind was clear now, laser-focused, the way it always became when lives were on the line. He wouldn't fail this family, not tonight, not ever again. The storm had grown so fierce that Daniel could barely hear the engine anymore. Every gust shook the truck violently, and the headlights illuminated nothing but an endless whirl of white. The road beneath them twisted into uncertainty, but Daniel kept moving, one cautious foot of progress at a time. Shadow suddenly stood up, tail stiff, ears pointed toward the window. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Daniel's eyes flicked to the right. "You see something, boy?" Shadow pressed his paws against the glass, staring into the darkness. Daniel slowed the truck, squinting into the storm. For a moment he saw nothing, but then, through the swirling snow, he caught a faint, flickering shape. A roofline, a structure. Hope jolted through him. He guided the truck off the main road, tires crunching over untouched snow, until the outline grew clearer. A small cabin, half buried under snowdrifts. The wood looked old, the windows frosted over, but it was standing. "A ranger cabin," Daniel breathed. "Thank God." Elena stirred weakly beside him. "Are we?" There? Almost, Daniel said. Just hold on a little longer. The children, huddled around Shadow, looked up with wide eyes as the truck rolled to a stop outside the cabin. The storm screamed around them, making the wooden structure groan under the pressure. But it was shelter. Solid, enclosed, warmable. That was enough. Daniel threw the truck into park and jumped out, the wind nearly knocking him sideways. The cold hit him like a punch, stealing his breath instantly, but he forced himself forward. He stomped through the snow to the door and threw his shoulder against it. Nothing. Frozen solid. "Come on!" Daniel growled under his breath. He backed up, then slammed into it again. The wood cracked, snow shaken loose from the roof. One more hit, and the door finally burst open, flying inward with a bang. Inside, darkness swallowed everything, but it was dry, protected, life-saving. He hurried back to the truck. "Everyone out! Stay close to me and Shadow." Shadow hopped down first, instantly positioning himself beside the children, guiding them toward the cabin with gentle nudges. Daniel lifted Elena carefully. Her legs barely held her weight. The newborn whimpered, and Daniel shielded the baby with his arm as the icy wind bit into their skin. Each step felt like a battle, but they moved together, Shadow leading the way. When they finally stumbled inside, the sudden silence almost shocked them. No wind, no snow. Just darkness and cold air that wasn't trying to kill them. Daniel shut the broken door behind them, sealing out the storm. The children sank to the floor, breathing heavily. Elena collapsed onto a wooden bench, clutching her newborn tightly. Daniel scanned the room with a flashlight strapped to his vest. A stone fireplace, an old metal stove, stacks of emergency supplies on the shelf. Dust everywhere, but it was real shelter. "All right," Daniel said, voice steady and authoritative. "Nobody panic. We're safe for now. I'm getting a fire started." Elena's eyes filled with tears, not from weakness but from relief so powerful it nearly broke her. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He was already gathering wood, checking tools, assessing every corner of the cabin like a soldier preparing a defense. He had found them shelter, but survival? That was only beginning. The cabin offered shelter, but the cold inside was still sharp enough to sting the skin. The air felt frozen in place, heavy and unmoving. Daniel knelt in front of the stone fireplace, striking matches with stiff fingers until finally, after several failed attempts, a small flame caught on the dry kindling. "Come on, grow," he whispered, shielding the flicker with his hands. Shadow lay beside the children, wrapping his warm body around them like a living blanket. Their tiny hands clung to his fur, huddling close. The youngest boy pressed his cheek against Shadow's chest just to feel the heartbeat, a rhythm stronger than the storm outside. Elena sat silently on the bench, trembling uncontrollably. The newborn's whimpers had grown weaker, barely audible over the wind rattling the cabin walls. Daniel glanced over his shoulder at them, his jaw tightening. "Hang in there. The fire's coming." The flame finally spread to the larger logs, crackling softly. Warmth began to seep into the room, slowly like a shy guest afraid to enter. Daniel grabbed blankets from the emergency shelf, shaking the dust off them, then wrapped each child carefully. "You're safe now," he told them gently. "Stay near Shadow. He'll keep you warm." The oldest girl nodded, tightening her grip on the blanket. "Thank you for finding us," she whispered. Daniel managed a small smile, but his worry grew sharper when he looked at Elena. She was slumped forward, breathing shallowly. Her fingers were stiff, and her skin had lost most of its color. He knelt beside her. "Elena, talk to me. How are you feeling?" She forced her eyes open. "Cold. So cold." I couldn't keep the baby warm." Daniel gently lifted the newborn, checking the tiny face. The baby's skin was frighteningly cool, and Daniel felt panic claw at his chest. He grabbed another blanket, warmed it near the fire, and wrapped the baby tightly. "Stay awake, Elena. You're safe now. We'll warm the baby up." She nodded weakly, tears slipping from her eyes. "I thought we wouldn't make it." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You made it because you kept fighting. Now we keep going." Shadow suddenly lifted his head, Ears perked. He stood and walked over to Elena, pressing his warm body against her legs. His tail thumped softly, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. A small smile formed on Elena's lips. "He knows," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "He always knows." The fire grew stronger, filling the cabin with a gentle glow. Color returned slowly to the children's faces. The newborn's breathing steadied, the warmth finally reaching its tiny body. It wasn't much. It wasn't perfect. But it was life returning. Daniel looked around the dim cabin, firelight flickering on the walls, and made a silent promise to himself. This storm would not take them. Not today, not tonight, not as long as he was breathing. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with a warm glow that pushed back the freezing air. For the first time since they'd entered, the children's trembling had eased. Shadow lay curled around them, their tiny hands buried in his fur, as if he were the only anchor in their world. Elena, however, still shook badly. She held her baby close, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. Daniel knelt beside her again, checking her pulse, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "You're warming up," he said gently. "Just keep breathing slowly." She nodded, but something was different in her expression. Her eyes didn't hold just exhaustion anymore. They held fear, a quiet, lingering fear that had nothing to do with the storm. Daniel noticed instantly. "Elena, what is it?" She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the blanket, knuckles white. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing the internal war she was fighting. "I didn't tell you everything," she whispered. Daniel remained calm, giving her space. "You don't have to talk right now. Rest." "No." She shook her head weakly. "You deserve the truth. You risked your life for us. I can't lie. Not to the person who saved my children." Daniel's voice softened. "Then tell me whatever you feel ready to tell." Elena swallowed, eyes filling with tears. "We weren't just traveling to my sister's house. We were running." Daniel's brows drew together. "Running? From what?" She looked down at her baby, brushing a trembling thumb across the tiny forehead. "From someone who wasn't supposed to find us." The children stiffened at her words. Even Shadow lifted his head, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Daniel leaned forward, his tone steady and protective. "Who were you running from, Elena?" She took a shaky breath. "My husband's brother, Paul." Daniel waited silently. "He changed after Michael died, became violent, angry at everything. He blamed me for things I never did. Said I was weak, said Michael should have never married me." Her voice cracked. "He would show up at the house drunk, yelling at the kids, throwing things. One night, he pushed my oldest son so hard he hit the wall." Daniel felt his jaw clench, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I called the police. They warned him. But warnings don't change people like him," she continued. "When he found out I planned to leave for my sister's place, he threatened me. Said he'd take the kids away if I tried." Her hands shook harder now. "So I waited for a day he wouldn't expect, packed what little we had, left early. I thought—" She paused, voice breaking. "I thought we were finally safe." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Elena, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have gone through that alone." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She wiped them away weakly. "I just wanted my kids to have peace, a real home, a life without fear." Shadow stood and stepped closer to her, resting his head gently on her knee. Elena let out a soft, shaky breath, comforted by the gesture. Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "No one is taking your kids, not while I'm here." Her eyes widened slightly, relief mixing with fear. "I don't think he's far behind," she whispered. "He knew the route we'd take. He always knows." The fire crackled, the wind howled. And for the first time since entering the cabin, Daniel felt a new danger creeping toward them. Not from nature, but from a man. A man who was willing to chase a widow and 5 children through a deadly blizzard. The fire crackled softly, casting trembling shadows across the wooden walls. The storm outside roared even louder, as if trying to warn them of something approaching. Daniel threw a few more logs into the fireplace, feeding the flames, but his mind wasn't on the fire anymore. It was on Elena's last words. "He always knows." Shadow suddenly stood up, rigid, alert, every muscle in his body tightened like a coiled spring. His ears shot forward, his eyes fixed on the door. A low growl rolled from deep in his chest, darker and more dangerous than any sound he had made tonight. Daniel froze. Shadow only growled like that when something, or someone, meant harm. He reached slowly for the emergency flare gun hanging by the cabin window. The children clung to each other, their eyes wide with fear. Elena tightened her arms around her newborn, her entire body trembling again, not from the cold this time, but from recognition. A thud echoed outside, a heavy boot step, then another. Snow crunched under someone's weight, closer, closer, stopping right outside the door. The entire cabin held its breath. Shadow bared his teeth, stepping in front of the children, positioning his body like a shield between them and the door. His growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards. Daniel lifted a finger to his lips, signaling everyone to stay quiet. A loud bang shook the door. "Elena!" A man's voice roared over the storm. "Open this door now!" Elena gasped, covering her mouth to muffle a cry. Her whole body curled protectively around her baby. The children backed into the corner, tears streaming silently down their faces. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Another bang, harder this time. Snow drifted from the ceiling beams. "I know you're in there." The voice was thick with rage. "You think a little storm can hide you from me?" Daniel stepped closer to the door, flare gun steady in his grip. His heartbeat slowed, not from fear but from focus. This was the version of Daniel the military had shaped, controlled, strategic, unshakable. "Elena," he whispered without turning, "he's not getting inside. I promise you that." Shadow barked suddenly, loud and sharp, the kind of bark that warned an intruder they were seconds from being torn apart. Silence followed. A heavy breathing sound lingered outside the door. Then footsteps moved away slowly, crunching through snow but not disappearing. He wasn't leaving. He was circling, waiting, watching. The storm outside was no longer the only threat. Inside the cabin, Daniel raised his chin, eyes hard, ready for whatever came next. This time, he wasn't saving a family on a battlefield. He was protecting one in the middle of a blizzard, and he would not fail. Daniel kept his back pressed against the door, muscles tense, listening to the crunching footsteps outside circling the cabin like a predator choosing the right moment to strike. Shadow stayed beside him, growling low, ready to launch forward if the door so much as shook again. Inside, the children huddled together, eyes red with fear. Elena clutched her newborn against her chest, whispering soft prayers under her breath. The fire crackled, its light flickering across their frightened faces. Daniel held the flare gun steady. "Stay quiet, stay low. He's waiting for an opening." Another gust slammed the cabin walls, drowning out the footsteps for a moment. But then, a distant sound cut through the storm. Not the wind, not footsteps. A pulsing, rhythmic thump. Daniel's eyes widened. "A helicopter!" He rushed to the window, wiping frost away with his sleeve. Through the storm's thick veil, he saw it. A search and rescue chopper slicing through the blizzard, its spotlight scanning the forest. Shadow barked sharply, tail whipping with recognition. Help was near. Daniel grabbed the emergency flare from the shelf, kicked the door open, and stepped into the storm without hesitation. The freezing wind punched into him, stealing his breath, but he raised the flare high and fired. A bright red streak tore across the sky, bursting like fire against the darkness. The helicopter's spotlight snapped toward the cabin instantly. He could see it shifting direction, heading straight for them. Suddenly, a figure lunged from behind a snowbank. Paul. Rage twisted across his face as he charged at Daniel. But before he reached him, a blinding flood of light washed over them, the helicopter hovering above. A powerful gust from its rotors threw snow everywhere, knocking Paul off balance. Shadow shot out of the cabin like lightning, planting himself between Daniel and the attacker with a furious snarl. On the ground below, rescue vehicles powered through the deep snow, sirens muffled by the storm. Within seconds, armed rangers surrounded the cabin, pulling Paul away and restraining him despite his screams. Daniel exhaled, breath shaking, as relief washed through him like warmth. They were safe. The Rangers rushed into the cabin, gathering the children and Elena gently, wrapping them in thermal blankets and checking their vitals. "You found them just in time," one medic said, placing a warm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Another hour in this storm, they wouldn't have made it." Daniel looked back at Shadow, who stood proudly beside the children. "Then we didn't have an hour to waste," he said softly. The hospital was warm, bright, and peaceful. Everything the storm outside had fought so hard to take away. Daniel sat in the hallway with Shadow curled beside him, the dog finally resting after hours of nonstop alertness. Nurses moved in and out of rooms, their footsteps soft, their voices calm. It felt like another world compared to the freezing chaos of the mountain. Daniel kept replaying the night in his mind, the blizzard, the cabin, the fear in the children's eyes. But now, for the first time, his chest loosened. They were safe, really safe. The doors to the emergency ward opened, and a doctor approached with a tired but warm smile. "Captain Reed?" Daniel stood immediately. Shadow rose too, ears alert. "They're stable," the doctor said. "All of them. The baby is warming up perfectly. And Elena, well, she's a fighter. She just needs rest." Daniel nodded, relief washing over him like a quiet wave. "Can I see them?" he asked. The doctor gestured for him to follow. Inside the room, Elena lay propped up with blankets. The newborn slept peacefully in her arms. The children were gathered around her bed, their faces brighter, cheeks rosy and warm after proper care. When they saw Daniel, all four children ran toward him, wrapping their small arms around his waist. Shadow wagged his tail, leaning into their touch as they hugged him too. "You saved Mommy," the oldest girl whispered, looking up at Daniel with grateful eyes. Daniel knelt to their level. "No," he said softly. "She saved all of you by fighting through that storm. I just helped get you the rest of the way." Elena watched with tears forming, her voice weak but full of emotion. "Captain, I don't know how to thank you." Daniel stepped closer, his voice warm. "You already did. You kept going when most people would have given up. Your strength got your children here alive." Shadow placed his head gently on the side of Elena's bed, earning a soft laugh from her. She reached out and stroked the dog's fur. "He's our angel," she whispered. "Both of you are." The room fell into a peaceful silence. Daniel looked at the children, then at Elena. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "If you ever need help, you come to me." Elena nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from hope. It wasn't just the end of a terrifying night. It was the beginning of a new life, a life where they were finally safe, a life where someone was watching over them. And Shadow, lying proudly at their feet, closed his eyes as if he already knew. His mission wasn't over.